I am so proud to present the first episode of Between Lewis and Lovecraft. Thank you so much for checking it out. You'll hear me say thank you way more at the end of the episode. This show is all about learning more about the authors that have inspired us and diving into the stories that they not only created, but lived as well. So join us as we explore the worlds that are just out of reach. Today we're talking about C.S. Lewis and his earlier life leading up to the point where he joined the military and went off to war. Clive Stable Lewis, also known as Jack to his friends, was no foreigner to pain and strife, and we dive into his acceptance of that and the realization that growing up, he was never a Christian. Also, we're going to talk about his spanking fetish. This is a multiple episode series where we cover his life, imagination, as well as some of the more subtle themes he laid into his works. If you want to know Lewis for more than just a Christian apologist, or to understand the personal history that helped to create a beloved fantasy, then this is a great place to start. All right, everybody, welcome to the first episode of Between Lewis and Lovecraft. I am Tyler Clausen, and with me is...
Hannah Ray Lambert.
Welcome, Hannah. I shouldn't say welcome like you're the guest.
I'll say welcome to you.
Oh,
welcome both of us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great that we're both here.
To my podcast and your podcast. We do have a guest, kind of, sitting on the couch with me. Is our friend Amy.
Here at the Book Nook.
Yeah, let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
We're recording in a bookstore.
Which is the perfect setting for this, because we're going to talk about books.
Yeah. So if you stumble across this podcast and you're like, what's this podcast about? Honestly, we don't entirely know yet, because this is the first episode, but the hope is that we're going to dive into authors and their books and their stories, both on the page and off the page, and try to discover our new favorite authors.
Yeah, and the writing process in general. We're both writers ourselves, so that'll probably come up.
If you're wondering where the title comes from, it is my two favorite authors in the world, C.S. Lewis and H.P. Lovecraft, two completely different authors, two completely different men who have influenced my own work and the lives of so many people. So kind of that in-between area is where we're going to be sitting with all the other people. So we're hanging out at the Book Nook, which is the only place in our hometown that I come to now.
That's not a lie either. Like, anytime you come into the Book Nook, you'll probably see Tyler.
Yeah, I just hang out on these super radical golden sofa and chairs. What color would you say that these are, Amy?
A weird-looking yellow.
She said a weird-looking yellow, for those who couldn't hear her.
What would you say?
I don't know. Gold? They're a little bit shiny, so I'd say gold.
Well, they're
gold, but not very gold.
They're kind of
very
gold. Yeah. So we're hanging out here, and that's going to get super annoying if it keeps doing that. It's going to do it every time. So this is the first episode. We're still trying to get figured out. Okay, we're back. And I fixed the problem.
He thinks.
Because I'm a technical genius.
Technical
the way
something.
that C.S. Lewis was a literary genius. You like that segue?
Whoa, transition.
Boom. We're going to talk about C.S. Lewis.
Yep, and I think the first thing we should decide on is what are we going to call him? Because he has a lot of names he goes by.
Yeah, he does. There's Clive. Mm-hmm. There's Lewis. Mm-hmm. There's Jack.
And for people who, like me, might be confused about why a guy named Clive would go by Jack, do you know the backstory, Tyler?
I do, but I think I only know it because of your outline, maybe, because
really?
I don't think they had it in my book that I was reading.
That seems like something that they should really establish up front, because I was very confused about why I picked up this biography on C.S. Lewis and it was called Jack.
Jack.
I was just like, who is Jack?
This guy didn't know Jack.
But no, so he started going by Jaxie when he was 4,
mm-hmm.
and his beloved pet dog got hit by a car.
Right.
So it's kind of sad. He refused to go by anything other than Jaxie, and then as he got older, he finally let people start calling him Jack, which I think is a lot better. It's more respectable than Jaxie.
Yeah. Can you imagine, like, at his graduation, and the valedictorian is Jaxie
Lewis.
That's a terrible English accent, but you guys are going to have to get used to that because he was English.
He was English.
So I'm going to do that a lot.
Actually, no, he's Irish. He was born in Belfast.
Right. Oh, we're getting into it.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that was an even smoother transition than mine.
Well, set me up for a correction, and I can be like, technically.
Actually. You need glasses just so that you can push them up. Yeah.
Tyler has glasses. If you've never seen him in real life, he pushes them up sometimes and looks very intelligent.
If we ever do... Thank you. I appreciate that. If we ever do photos, as a promotional thing, I'm not going to wear my glasses in them. I think I've decided not to wear glasses in pictures anymore. Because I don't like the way that they look. And I think they're more of like a thing that you... If I don't wear them and people are like, oh, he's just a regular looking guy, and then they meet me on the street and I'm wearing glasses, they're going to be like, oh, he's actually super smart looking. Right? Like, it's that kind of set a new expectation.
So you want people to not think you're smart?
Exactly.
I want everyone low standard or low expectations.
Everyone who listens to this podcast to know Hannah's the smart one.
Oh.
And Tyler's the clown. And
that's a lot of pressure.
Well, you did write the entire outline for the episode.
That's because Tyler's lazy. Just kidding. He did all of this work.
First episode. And she's figured it out.
No, it's okay. Tyler's going to do most of the talking. I like the background work.
Sure. So,
yeah. Yeah.
She thinks I'm going to do most of the talking, but...
He's just going to sit there awkwardly and make me fill the silence.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a good reporter trick.
So let's get into it, because we've already been talking for 5 minutes.
Oh, God.
And we've only slightly gotten into C.S. Lewis and who he was. We're going with C.S. Lewis first, because his name comes first in the title of our show. And he really, growing up, he was 100% my favorite author. Reading the Narnia books, and then once I got older and I got into more serious tones of stuff, I started reading the Screwtape Letters, Mere Christianity, The Great Divorce. These are books that he wrote that are allegories. Mere Christianity is more of a collection of essays, but the Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce, those are allegories for a Christian lifestyle, which is what I've lived my entire life. And it's easier to read those as a believer and put them into practice than Narnia.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, just go through a wardrobe and you'll find Jesus. It's totally fine.
I mean, that seems a lot easier. I wish it were that easy.
Yeah, I know, right? I have gone into every wardrobe I've ever seen, and I haven't found Jesus in the back of any of them. Or a lion.
Or a lion, yeah. I'd be down with either.
But, so a lot of his writings have influenced my own life, my own writing style, and all of that. So I wanted to start with him because I've known of him longest.
And I think it's super interesting. I didn't know prior to researching him for this. I think it's interesting that he is such a staple in Christian literature.
Right.
When for a good portion of his life, he considered himself an atheist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, towards his late 20s is where he started to slightly allow God into the conversation. But
still not in a super positive way.
Right. And we're definitely going to get into that. If not in this specific episode, this isn't going to be a Lewis podcast, but we're probably going to talk about his works and his life a little bit more as things go on. I definitely want to set the tone, the expectation that we're just investigating these authors and doing one hour episode on an author at a time. You're not going to get everything. So, as we discover more of stuff, we're always going to be interested in talking about that. And listeners, I'm already going to throw it out to you. If you guys have information or questions that we can look into, don't be afraid to talk to us. We'll have our contact info at the end of the show. I'm not going to push it too much right now because I'm really excited.
You can't remember our email address, can you?
100% yes.
Just had to put him on the spot there. Yeah. But anyway, so shall we?
Let's get into it. Let's jump into it.
So starting with the basics, and I'll reference the outline here. As I mentioned,
I like how she's not even looking at the outline.
I'm not.
She's memorized this.
I'm pretending right here, but no, I'm going to look at it. So C.S. Lewis stands for Clive Staples Lewis, by the way, which...
Is it Staples?
Staples? I think it is.
Oh, she's got to look at her book.
I do, because I didn't actually write out what his name was.
Which I find hilarious.
Staples, plural.
Staples. Quick little... Already I'm getting sidetracked, but it's really funny because I didn't know what C.S. Lewis or C.S. stood for as growing up. when I was in middle school, I broke my elbow twice, and I had to have surgery on it a few times, and they put staples into my arms. So my nickname through all of high school was Staples.
Wow.
What?
You are really connected to CS.
I didn't even know at that time.
You didn't even know.
Right? Yeah.
Wow. Your life is like one big metaphor, allegory, something. Your life is something, Tyler.
So Clive Staples Lewis.
Born in Belfast, Ireland in 1898, so at the turn of the century.
1898.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
His father was Welsh, and his mom was of Scottish descent. And her father was actually the priest of the church that his dad, Albert, attended. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing about his mom specifically is that she was kind of not that into his dad. I don't know if you got that in the biography you were reading.
I got a little bit of that, yeah.
She was kind of cold-hearted, and I love that about her. But I don't know that it made her a great mom. But she dated Albert's brother first, then led Albert on for many, many years before finally agreeing to marry him, but like not enthusiastically at all.
Right. And see, all of that I got the condensed version. I didn't know that she dated his brother.
Yeah.
Like, that's super weird. And then in the book that I was reading, which is The Narnian, he talks about how the mom was like very logical in everything she did, and she wrote a letter to him where she said, I know that I like you, but do I love you? Like, she's actually asking him after he proposes.
I was cringing when I read some of that. I was just like, girl, you are being harsh.
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, at some point she was just like, oh, I kind of like him as a friend and I don't want to lose him, so I guess I'll marry him. And also I'm getting old, so.
And her name was Flora? Flora. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. She was very smart. Like, from what I was reading, she was really good at school, but her parents were not good parents at all. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, she was a mathematician and a logical, I don't know what the term is for someone who studies logic. Logistician.
Logistician. That sounds very wrong, but it could be right.
I'm a logistician. If you ever claim to be a logistician, I think that automatically negates you from using logic.
But yeah, so their family seemed to be in a good place financially, like middle class, but I guess middle class back then, you had servants and stuff, so
yeah.
What a time to be alive.
I've definitely never been middle class.
Yeah, right? We are in poverty.
Middle class sucks.
And then Clive, Jack, whatever you want to call him, he grew up with an older brother named Warren, who was like his best friend, basically. Yeah. They lived together practically their whole lives.
Yeah. I mean, there was time from when Warnie went off to college, and then eventually Jack went off to college, and for basically those years specifically, they didn't live together.
Yeah.
But like the rest of their lives, both before and after college, they eventually just spent their whole life together.
Yeah. So I assume they were very close.
You would think so.
On that. I mean, they seem to get along quite well.
I like my brothers, but I could not live with them.
I don't know if I could either.
Right?
And one of the important moments of Jack's childhood, or defining qualities.
It's a big moment. The moment.
Which moment are you thinking?
I don't know. I'm going with the death, but maybe you're not. Now I'm second guessing myself.
Actually, I was going to start earlier than that. When he was very young, his parents got convinced that he had a weak chest, partially because around the time he was growing up, like, I guess a lot of children had been getting very, very sick.
Sure.
So all parents were very paranoid. So
yeah, I didn't read about this at all.
Really?
I didn't hear about this at all.
See, I think this is so interesting because as a result of it, they kept him inside whenever it was rainy. And I pictured that being part of the inspiration for later on when he would write, the line, The Witch and the Wardrobe, how they're all inside on a rainy day, playing in those long hallways and hiding. And I could just see him as a child doing that because his parents won't let him go outside.
Yeah, and there's a couple of kids in the Narnia books that are sickly children too. So I could see that. Yeah, that's super interesting. And again, my book didn't mention that at all.
Really?
I think maybe he mentioned that he was a sickly kid.
Yeah, see,
and that's weird.
George Sayer, the author of my biography that I read, said basically there was no evidence that Clive was a sick child.
They just were worried about it.
Yeah, they were just worried about it. They were very paranoid. So yeah, he was kept inside all the time. Flora did take the boys away to the seaside for about 3 months every year. And I guess that was one of the most joyous times of his life. He loved the seaside.
He definitely throughout his life, and reading my book, it talks about it time and time again. Anytime he's by the ocean, C.S. Lewis was happy.
Yeah.
And I think, again, you see that in his writing. There are a lot of places where, like, Aslan is on the beach side or at the coast or something, and that represents heaven, or the new land is that perfect place. So I definitely can see how that translated through his writing. At least later on, maybe he reflected on it.
Yeah. Something he held close to his heart. And, I mean, we're coming up on the big moment. The big one.
The big bomb. The elephant in the room.
So Clive was educated by tutors at home mostly. But then, when he was about 9 years old, his mom died.
Yeah.
Sad.
Which is a big deal.
It is. When you're 9, you're so young. And he was so much closer to her than his dad. And
which I think is normal for that time, right? Like, the mom takes care of the kids and the home, and the sons, they grow up with this mom figure. The man of the house is out doing work or in a room doing work, and you don't bother him or something like that. And I think Albert, C.S. Lewis's dad, he seemed like a very good person. He wasn't like an abuser of any kind.
No.
But I'm sure there's still that culture of, where
you're just not as close to your dad back then, because your mom does all of the loving stuff,
and you're a part of his company or whatever you do, because sons always took over for whatever that business was of the father, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's a big deal. And I know for me, like, so my mom left my dad when I was 7. She just straight ran away, right? Down the street. She got an apartment on the other side of town. Yeah. Well, and she didn't go very far because of us. But end of the day, she left and she went somewhere else. And that's a big deal. That's a big scar in my life. I'm 30 years old and I'm still getting over that, and my parents were divorced, and it affects everything in my life. I'm a people pleaser. I need attention. Why do you think I'm doing a podcast? I need people to
love him, Canby. Love him.
Please, God. Not just Canby, everybody.
Everybody.
I need attention, and it's because my mom left, right? And so, like, there's a lot that goes into that, and so, it's. I think it's easy for people to pass over and just be like, yeah, his mom died, but it affects so much of who you are, especially at that age, especially that relationship.
Well, it probably had a huge impact on his relationships with women.
Well, yeah, we're going to get into that soon. I was just going to say, like, we're going to see those scars and that working through all that come back. And you even see that, again, in his writing, in the Narnia books, in the first, not the first written, which was Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the first chronologically, which is The Magician's Nephew. You see the setup is this young boy is he is playing outside because his mom is ill, and he's just like dreading the fact. Well, he's not even dreading. He's just kind of coming to terms with the fact that she is going to die. And the whole point of that book is that he wants to save her by going to this magic tree that has a magic fruit, and if she eats it, it'll heal her and she'll be good. And I think that's something that, where else did he get that premise for that book other than, I wish that I could have saved my mom? And you even see that in a lot of the stuff that he was dealing with in at such a young age, where he was praying to God to bring her back to life. Well, after he was praying for him to heal her, he was praying to God to bring her back to life, right? And he admits as himself, like, that it is more of a ritual thing he was doing, not even as a Christian, because he didn't even consider himself a Christian at that time, but rather a magical ritual that he would hope would take effect in the world and bring her to life. So, yeah, I don't know. I could go on for a while about that.
Well, yeah, it's definitely something that, like you said, leaves a long-lasting emotional scar. Yeah. And I don't think it's surprising, because, he wrote The Magician's Nephew very late in his life and career. Yeah. So you can see he
didn't write it as a 9-year-old.
No. He had plenty of time to think about it and craft the way he wanted to communicate that feeling.
Yeah. So I opened up pretty emotionally right there. So now it's your turn, Hannah. What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you?
I don't know.
Not yet? We're not getting there yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
Maybe in another episode with a different author.
Right? Yeah. I think it'll be. We'll have to see. But anyway, so after his mom died, his dad kind of sent him away for school. He'd already sent Warren away for a couple years at that point. Because that was kind of the thing to
was
do.
Warren away at that point? He had left
Warner,
for school?
yeah.
Sorry,
or Warren.
I call him
Sorry.
by how they call him in my book. So I know his proper name isn't Warney, but that's what I call him.
But yeah, so Warren had been away studying at Wynyard. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I'm not even going to try.
I'm going to say Wynyard.
Do it.
Okay.
And all the English
Nobody
people that
look
listen
it
to our
up.
show can tell us it's pronounced Wynyard.
It's closed now, so it doesn't matter.
It does not
Spoiler
matter.
alert. But Warren had already been going to this school for 3 years. Sending your kids away to school, especially your boys, was not, atypical for that time. They thought it would give them better standing in life. It would teach them manners and help them make connections and stuff. So it was pretty important for these upper middle class families who were like, oh, we want our boys to do well.
Especially someone from someone from Ireland who wanted his boys to be more English, which is what Albert wanted. He sent them specifically to English preparatory schools so that they can be more English, which is super weird.
I mean, I think the Irish are pretty cool, but whatever. It was a different time. But the thing is, even though his father meant well, he didn't really do any research on the school at all.
Right.
He didn't send anyone to check it out. He didn't, make any phone calls or telegraphs or whatever you did back then.
Yeah.
He did not put in the research that he should have because Wynyard was a hellhole.
Yeah.
It was the worst place ever.
Yeah, it was.
And George Thayer, at least in my biography, writes that, C.S. Lewis and Warren were not exaggerating because everybody who went to Wynyard was like, this is terrible.
The guy in charge was insane.
He was
literally insane.
Headmaster Reverend Robert Capron was about 60 years old, and there's speculation that he did have actual mental illness. He would basically beat pupils with a cane or whatever.
Yeah,
so,
it was pretty bad. And, I mean, you can see a lot of the process of C.S. Lewis becoming internal with his thoughts and stuff. He tried to be the best student he could because he didn't want to get beat.
Yeah.
And didn't the headmaster liked C.S. Lewis, right? Like, he actually liked him as a student?
I mean, he must have because he never beat him. he escaped unscathed, basically. But aside from being a terrifying environment to learn in, Warren wrote his brother that basically they didn't learn at all.
Right.
It was all about reciting lessons and memorizing stuff. So you didn't learn how to think on your own. You basically just did the same thing over and over again. So it kind of stunted. I think Warren especially thought it stunted his education.
We're being licked by this dog, Scarlett O'Hara.
Which is the best name for a dog ever. Also, she looks like a Scarlett O'Hara.
Does she?
She is regal looking.
Sure. And she likes to lick people.
She does.
I mean, that's in the original book, right? Scarlett O'Hara just went around and licked everybody. And then she made clothes out of curtains.
Yeah. I think that's the revised edition.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's in the sequel. I forgot.
But yeah, so do you have any other thoughts on Wynyard and what that would have done to his...
I have a lot of thoughts on it. And, to keep the show going a little bit, we're going to skip over all of my thoughts.
You have a lot of thoughts.
Well, again, it just goes into a lot of stuff that I've experienced in my life. And you guys are going to get that a lot.
His teachers beat him.
Not me. No. My friends, I have friends and close family ish who they went to a school where the principal / pastor of that school was very verbally and physically abusive.
In recent history?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is. And he went to jail.
Oh.
And it's bad. It's really bad. It scars people and my friends. I'm really trying to make sure I don't point anybody out.
Yeah, don't name names.
Yeah, and really not even say the relationships too much. My friends, a lot of them are very talented, and a lot of them, I feel a lot of their confidence is stunted by that type of relationship that they've had with someone who is supposed to teach and care and help people prosper. And it's it's really sad to think about where these people could be and where they are now. Not that where they're at now is sad, not at all. They're all very functional and loving and wonderful people, but the confidence thing, you know, and the lack of confidence, and you have to wonder if Lewis was going through that same thing with, you know, if he understood where he was or what he was capable of. And I think we see that come out a lot later on with other tutors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So luckily the experience doesn't seem to have,
I think he was young enough to get over it.
Yeah.
And he wasn't there for very long, so.
Also, maybe it had to do with the fact that he wasn't that invested in school. I mean,
Yeah.
you see it even early on. He was not very interested in his classes. He was kind of a troublemaker. So was Warren.
Yeah, and then when he went off to the other school, they were really all about like physical activities and sports, and it almost was the opposite, where he suddenly became very much about the intellectual side of school because he hated sports.
Yes,
Did I skip
I can
ahead
relate
too
to
far?
that.
Did I?
Well,
I saw you scroll quite a bit.
I can't remember. Was that Campbell College or Cherbourg House in Malvern?
I think it was Cherbourg.
Okay,
Yeah.
so after Wynyard, it actually closed because there weren't enough students because it was terrible.
Yeah.
So then he went to Campbell College, which was closer to home, but he didn't stay very long because of respiratory issues. So, you know, maybe he was a sickly child.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe he was.
And yeah, I don't know.
But so then he ended up going to Malvern and Cherbourg House, and he stayed there until around 1913, so he would have been 15 years old. And this was, interestingly enough, around the time he officially abandoned his Christian faith.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I don't know if it was essentially that he abandoned it or that he realized he never was.
True.
And I think that's what in the Narnian, what they talk about a little bit more is he was never a Christian because everything that he believed was all about the rituals. And if I do things the right way, then I'll get what I want. And he realized he was never going to do them the right way. And he was caused a lot of grief and stress through this because he wanted to make his life better and it wasn't getting any better. And I identify with that too. You know, I identify with coming to the realization that your faith is not the same as your father's faith. And I think that was his case, as he was realizing he did not believe the same thing that his dad did. And I think that that's a trend that continues on almost for the rest of his father's life, with the rest of his relationship with his father. And we see that almost come to a head with the way that they treat each other. Well, really more the way that Lewis treats his dad.
Yeah, I know the author of my biography, he mentioned largely that C.S. Lewis's treatment of his dad might not have been all that fair.
Yeah.
He wasn't a bad dad, but
Right.
they just never really connected. And
Yeah, there was a lot of I think for me, I see Lewis realizing how much smarter he is than his dad. And it's
and being kind of smug about
kind
it.
of being a dick about it. Like, he's like, Dad, you still believe that, you know, and there's actually a passage, and let me try and find it because it's actually super hilarious. So hold on just a second. Talk about something else from your outline.
Tyler's going to do some really awesome stretching now to grab his book. But yeah, it really wasn't that impressive.
Go ahead. And
Well, I'm not going to keep talking because then you're going to interrupt with...
Just keep talking.
Okay. So also while he was at Cherbourg House in Malvern, the other important thing that happened was C.S. met Arthur Greaves, who would become his best friend aside from his brother Warren, and that would be a pretty much lifelong relationship. But he didn't stay there for the rest of his educational career. He ended up studying privately with his dad's former tutor, who was named William Kirkpatrick.
The Great Knock.
Is that what he goes by in yours?
That's what they called him.
That's what they called him?
The Great Knock.
The Great Knock.
Yeah, you didn't get to see all that?
No, why?
Mr. Kirkpatrick?
Why is that his nickname?
So actually, I'm right on that page. So that's actually good. So in the Narnian, I've got so one of the funniest and most delightful passages in all of Lewis's writing, the story of his encounter with Mr. William T. Kirkpatrick, or Kirk, or the Knock, or the Old Knock, or Dear Old Knock, or the Great Knock. So
They just called
had
him
a,
Kirk in mine.
Yeah, they had a whole list, and I feel like that's a common theme with the Lewises. They take names and they really just rung them through the ringer. Like they just mess with people's names all the time.
Yeah.
I'm still looking. So
He's still looking for his passage.
Yep. It's hilarious because it's so dumb.
Since Tyler's still skimming, so after studying with William Kirkpatrick, or the Great Knock, the Old Knock, something Knock,
I call him the Great Knock.
the Great Knock, it's a great nickname.
Yeah.
He got into Oxford for the summer term, but he didn't pass the math exam that you would normally have to because he wasn't interested in math, and the Great Knock did not make him do it.
Math. Yeah, he was all
just
about Latin and literature and the classics and things like that.
The things that would ultimately really help him, but
Right.
at that time, to get into Oxford, you kind of have to do everything.
So jumping back just a little bit, I
knew you were gonna do this.
No, I'm gonna abandon that because I can't find it, and it's an entire freaking book, and it's not gonna happen. So, but just jumping back a little bit, Lewis really liked the classics, and he liked reading poems and like big long poems. And this is
for sure.
I don't understand this. Can we just talk about long form poetry for a second?
We can talk about any kind of poetry.
Like, you like poetry?
No.
Oh, you don't like poetry?
No, not really.
Amy, do you like poetry? Amy loves poetry.
Amy's better than me, guys.
Have you read like a long form poem before? Like one of the classics? Like Homer's Iliad?
Beowulf or something?
Beowulf is a good one. Highly influential in C.S. Lewis's life and Tolkien's. The Odyssey, yeah. So these are poems. People write poems and tell entire epic stories with them. I can't write a haiku to save my life, but people are writing epic, long-ass poems.
Yep.
How does that happen? How do people do that?
And he was really a snob about it, too. He did not approve of free-form poetry or anything. He liked the very rigid, formulaic poems.
A, B, A, A, C, C, Formula Royal, or whatever it's called. It's dumb.
Stanzas and all that stuff, and yeah.
But what's funny is he was bad at it. But we're going to get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, he wasn't great at it.
Yeah.
But he did love it, and he quoted it to his students later on very passionately. And as Sayer, who was one of his students at one point, said, his delight was infectious. So he really loved it. But people aren't good at things they love all the time.
People can be like that. I think I'm like that about stuff. I really do. Again, not comparing myself to C.S. Lewis.
He's comparing himself to C.S. Lewis.
A little bit. But me and C.S. Lewis are best friends because... no, because when I get excited about something, like, even if people don't understand it, they're usually kind of like, oh, I get it. You know, but if somebody else, like... We were talking about Skyrim just a few minutes ago, right? Before we started recording. I've watched someone try to explain Skyrim to someone who didn't understand it. They're like, what is Skyrim? And someone jumps in front of them and is like, in the days of old, the darkness came upon the world and elves entered the land. And it's like, okay, no one's going to get that. But if you're just like excited about something, like you I don't know, there's a certain infectiousness that people can
I think people naturally like it when people are excited about stuff.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Like when I talk about chocolate chip cookies.
Are you excited about chocolate chip cookies?
I've been trying to get my wife to make me chocolate chip cookies for like a month.
Rebecca, make him chocolate chip cookies.
Thank you.
This is a PSA.
Bum, 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 bum. Make chocolate chip cookies.
Brought to you by Between Lewis and Lovecraft.
Yeah, so we were talking about poetry before. You were saying infectious because he's super
He was super into it.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of his poetry didn't do super well later on, he was very into it.
Yeah, he was. And I had something else that I was going to talk about, but I don't remember what it is now. He liked to go on walks.
Yeah.
Were you going to talk about that at all?
I mean, later on, because he and some of his writer buddies, they went on long walks.
Like long walks.
Like 3 a.m. and they were still walking walks.
Yeah, it's insane.
They
We'll
didn't have
talk about
TV
that
back
later,
then.
I guess. Yeah. Real quick, do you know how he ended up tutoring with Kirk?
Well, he was a friend of his dad, his dad's previous tutor.
But the great old Knock didn't want him, someone as young as him, to come tutor with him because he was already working with Warren, right? So do you know how he impressed him?
No.
So Albert's like, yo, this kid's real smart and he needs a tutor because right now he's just at home, right? He's just hanging out at home for a few months before he goes somewhere else. And Albert's like, dude, take this kid too. He's super smart. And the Knock's like, all right, here's what I'll do for you. Here's some Latin. Just have him try to translate as much as he can. Let's just see where he's at with that. So C.S. Lewis sits down and translates all of the Latin that he's been given.
Nice.
They send it back, and Kirkpatrick is like, yo, this kid not only translated all of it, but he did it better than most scholars my age would do it. So, yeah, send that kid over, because I got a lot to teach him. What, like he was like 12, 13, what?
He was like 15.
Yeah, 15 years old. And he is translating Latin better than scholars who that's what they study is Latin.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how smart this guy is.
He's so smart. So I guess the fact that he was a poor student should not reflect on his
so we were
actual
talking about
capacities
how he's bad at math. But
he's bad at math. I think there was some part in there where they're like he didn't really study some languages as well as he should have, like Italian and stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can do English and Latin, I guess you're okay. I mean, Latin doesn't matter anymore. But
it's your ability to construct sentences, and he understands it for enough to seem at least a little bit smart. And that's the thing. I was talking to someone about this because I do that. I get excited and I talk about C.S. Lewis, and people are like, really, he was that smart? And it's like, yeah, man. And like, I just thought he wrote like the Narnia books and that was it. It's like, no, he wrote like Narnia wasn't till the end of his career. Mm-hmm. Like there's a whole career spanning before that he was writing existential things, morality stuff, his Christian life and everything that goes into the apologetics of his life. Like he
came in hot really at the start of his career.
Yeah, he did. And he's known for Narnia, but his legacy involves so much more. And honestly, the man was a genius, and I don't think people recognize that enough. And I mean, he has his weird moments, and he's dumb in some places, but he still was a genius. And I think that there's a need to understand that as we go into the college years, because that's where a lot of that is really filtered out, and you see a lot of that, and the military stuff too.
Yeah. So the thing is, his math scores or lack thereof basically kept him from getting into Oxford after that first summer term.
Yeah.
So he ended up joining the Officers Training Corps and then had to join a cadet battalion and stop studying. But strangely enough, that was what allowed him to return to Oxford, because at the time, if you had been in the service, you didn't have to pass those exams, I guess. It was some little perk.
Yeah.
So it turned out to be good that he had to join the military.
Yeah, well, and yeah, in my book, it said if it hadn't been for his service, he would never have gotten into Oxford.
And that would have changed everything.
Everything.
Oxford was a huge part of his career, his influences, who he met.
Yeah.
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 Everything would have been different. So do we want to talk about the military next?
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of his life.
Yeah,
and there's a few different reasons. Number one, like I think everybody knows that Tolkien fought in World War I. That's where a lot of the Lord of the Rings stuff comes from, right? His older brother fought in the war and was there quite a while before him. But even those two didn't see as much action as Lewis did. Lewis went right into the trenches. Yeah. Like immediately. And almost immediately got trench fever. And then he immediately went to a hospital and just hung out for a few months by the coast.
I mean, he got to be by the coast, right?
Yeah.
He likes that.
He has his friend from the military. Do you remember
his roommate, Edward Paddy Moore?
Yes.
Yeah. And that ended up being a huge influence on his life.
Yeah. So real quick, let's step back. Let's talk about his friends a little bit before this period, right? Because he didn't have many.
No, he basically had his brother.
and one friend.
Then Greaves.
Arthur.
Arthur Greaves.
Yeah. Arthur Greaves is, to me, one of the coolest side characters I've ever heard of. And I'd love to... I mean, there's not much more that I know about him other than he was C.S. Lewis's best friend throughout his childhood and very good friend throughout his life. Arthur ended up being a huge influence in C.S. Lewis's Christian walk because throughout his childhood, he was the only Christian that he could talk to about things, right? Because he and C.S. Lewis they disagreed on stuff, and they really didn't have a lot in common.
Yeah.
But what they did have in common was the books that they liked to read, the myths and stories that they would come up with. An interesting fact is Arthur was gay and a Christian and C.S. Lewis's best friend, which I think it's just the coolest thing. Like, we were talking about this earlier. We were talking about Stranger Things, which is a great conversation to have. And you asked me about,
You asked me about one of the characters.
Right.
And at one point, no spoilers here or anything, but one of the characters says, you just don't like girls.
Right.
But he doesn't say yet. So we were wondering if the implication was that other character was gay.
Right.
Which then led to Arthur Greaves, who I feel like my book kind of skimmed over that. It didn't really bring it up at all.
It didn't really?
No.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So that conversation led to there because we're talking about, in this 80s era of Stranger Things, if it would have been weird to be so accepting of someone who's gay. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about how, like, in every era, you've got people who are very accepting of that. And it seems to me that C.S. Lewis was one of those people. And I liked what you brought up, where you said maybe it's because he wasn't a Christian.
Yeah, he was not a Christian at that time. Maybe that made it easier.
Yeah. And to me, there's a certain sense of, like, even if you're not a Christian at that time era, you're still, like, it's still weird.
It's still the early 1900s.
Right? Like, it's not something that people were very okay with. And so for C.S. Lewis, even if he's not a Christian, to be so accepting of his friend like that, I think that's just super cool.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm looking at it from the 2019 wanting to revive history to be cool, but I don't know. That's just me.
I mean, I think it is cool for that time period. It's like,
yeah,
you're going out on a limb, being friends with someone who's probably ostracized by a lot of society.
Probably. And so he has Arthur as a friend, and then he meets, I forget his name
Patty.
Every time. Patty.
They basically call him Patty.
Because it's a joke, and I don't like that name, so I forget it immediately. So he meets Patty Moore. And
he becomes super close with his family because Patty's mom, she had some sort of abode near where they were. Mm-hmm. And so on weekends and stuff, she would have, CS over, and then also other cadets or whatever. Sure. Her home was always open to them.
Yeah.
And he became super close with Patty and his mom.
Yeah.
To the point where later on in life, he lived with Patty's mom.
Well, and
in a house.
They made a pact, right?
They made a pact.
Patty and Lewis made a pact that if one of them dies at war, the other will take care of the other one's parent.
So you guys know where this is going, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, Patty did die in the war, and Lewis, I mean, by all accounts, lived up to his end of that pact, right? Because he got really weird with it.
He got really weird. Does your book acknowledge this? Because I had to put a little disclaimer in my outline.
I saw that in the outline.
I have the old version of this book where George Sayer was very pure and was like, no, Jack was just really good friends with Mrs. Moore. He was taking care of her. And then later on he was like, yeah, I was being naive. They were totally doing it.
Yeah, so in the Narnian, there is a lot of talk about that. They get kind of meta with it too, where they talk about the relationship itself, and then they talk about other commentators and their commentations on that relationship. One person who's a critic of C.S. Lewis's life, an author and all of that, was doing a talk, not a sermon. It's not a sermon.
Lecture?
Lecture. Thank you so much.
That's what I'm here for.
He was doing a lecture about C.S. Lewis, and somebody straight up in the audience was like, hey, did they do it? And the lecturer was like, well, there's evidence. And then the lecturer's wife in the very back of the auditorium is like, just tell them they did it. That's what they want to hear. So people, it's hard for people to say they didn't.
They
right?
didn't?
Because of the relationship that they had. It's super hard for people to be like, no, they weren't having sex.
Yeah.
They were just, and so it's hard for them to say they didn't. But there's no evidence. No evidence at all that they did. All of his letters to her were burned in 1945 when she thought she was going to die. And he did not keep any of her letters to him.
That seems pretty incriminating.
I mean, the lack of evidence does feel like evidence in of itself, but I mean, there's nothing to say they definitely, he gave it to Miss Moore. There's nothing saying that.
Yeah, and to be fair, in the, revision or whatever in this, the basis for him altering his opinion on whether or not they were hooking up was about talks with her daughter who lived with them, so maybe she would know.
She's living with them. Yeah.
But also,
how much older was he than the daughter? Not much older, right?
Oh, probably not, because Mrs. Moore is his friend who is
30
his
years
age.
older.
Yeah, she's a lot older than him.
Yeah. And one of the things, and this goes back to what we were talking about before, where he lost his mom when he was 7, right? And a lot of people look at it. One person even talks about if it started out sexual, which it very much could have started out sexual, it could have very much developed into a mother-son relationship, which is super weird,
super gross,
right? It's very much this kind of Oedipus relationship, but it could be there where a lot of younger gentlemen are attracted to older women because there's this weird fantasy of they know more or something, and so he very much could have got caught up in that, and then as he formed a relationship with her outside of that, it grew more and more and became less lustful and more about having someone above him in age, a feminine figure who was willing to keep him accountable and someone that he could tell his hopes and stuff to. And I read that one passage to you out of the Narnian where it says, in 1922, he started to keep a diary, and it is the most boring, dull document ever, right?
Which, with all of this going on in his life, it seems like it would be the total opposite.
But the reason they think that he wrote this diary is so that he could read it to Maureen. Maureen, right? Mrs. Moore.
Oh, no, Maureen was the daughter.
The daughter. I'm sorry, not Maureen. Yeah, to Mrs. Moore, because it was this chance for him to create dialogue with her and explain his life to her. And so, it's weird, but I could see that happening, especially as Mrs. Moore gets to the 80s point in
Did
her
she make it to 80?
I think it was 87.
Oh,
she was 87 when she died.
Gross.
Yeah. Real quick, did your book mention at all about Jack's fetish?
No.
No? Oh, man, it's so weird. Jack had a fetish.
Which was?
And I was talking to the Watermans here at the Book Nook about it. Yeah.
Megan just said, uh-oh, in the background.
So, C.S. Lewis liked to spank. He was a spanker.
Amy takes the headphones off. I'm so glad I got the sanitized version of his life.
So there's three bits of evidence, and I'm going to paraphrase, but this is all from the Narnian. The first bit is from letters sent to Arthur, his childhood best friend.
And he seemed to really open up about all of his weird stuff to Arthur.
Because Arthur opened up to him,
yeah.
Right? And he would talk about how much he wanted to spank girls. He would talk about that. And then there's something else where at college, when he was at Oxford, he would actively be
pursuing that.
Yeah, where he'd be like, yeah, that girl, I could spank
Swipe
that.
right.
I'm obviously making up, he's probably higher English than that, but
The
look at
gist is
that
still there.
bum over there. I'd like to give that a little putt. I don't know. But there is one incident for sure where he went to a party and got way too drunk, and then he paid a shilling for every spank he could do to people. He would pay people to spank them. A shilling for every spank.
How much is a shilling worth these days?
I don't know, but he went through his allowance real fast.
Oh.
Like,
all those Christians listening, this is your hero.
yeah, seriously, right? Like, it's so crazy. But everybody's weird. Everybody has a weird thing.
Well, and actually, now that you mentioned that, I guess he did mention it a little bit in my book. He said that he definitely went through like a sadistic time in his mind where he was thinking about stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that was it, and I think that's probably where it played out. I don't know if that party was the end of it, and maybe like the next morning his friends were like,
dude, that was weird.
Dude, what was that about?
Don't do that again.
Yeah.
You're embarrassing us.
So yeah, that C.S. Lewis did have a fetish.
Well, I think it's interesting. Like, I got the vibe that he really didn't like women that much, especially women his own age, because George Sayer wrote that he was really attracted to like feminine beauty, but he was kind of judgmental about girls and would like, deride their intellect and stuff and say that they weren't mature enough and stuff like that. So I feel like, and I don't think he necessarily had any relationships really until possibly Mrs. Moore, which was when he was an adult. Yeah. And she was obviously much older.
More adult.
Yeah, she was much adultier. So I just think he had some girl problems, possibly because his mom died when he was so young. Yeah. He was...
Well, and his where was he around women? Other than his mom?
Yeah, and they mentioned that. It's like he didn't have any female relatives his own age that he was hanging out with.
The servants would leave him alone. Yeah. So that he could just go and read. So even if he had female servants in the house, he was taught at a young age that women were supposed to leave him alone. Mm-hmm. His mom died. Women leave him alone. And then he goes and he hangs out with guys all the time.
And his brother Warren was the same way. He never married.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think they both kind of grew up in this way where they were very detached from women.
Right. It's super weird, man. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I don't know, man. That's my existential thing.
He doesn't know.
So, getting back into the military.
Yeah, getting away from his weird relationships.
I like how we were like, let's talk about his military. No, let's talk about spanking.
Well, it's because he met her around the same time he joined the military. Yeah. And you got to just explain that whole drama
right.
first.
Yeah, you kind of do because he, like, every time he had leave, he would spend it with Mrs. Moore.
And that really strained his already strained relationship with his dad.
Yeah,
poor Albert. Yeah. Unappreciated.
So this is actually a good way to kind of segue into this. He had a hard time with his dad, and when he left for war, his dad didn't come say goodbye. Did you know that?
Yes, but that was because his telegraph was super confusing, right?
See, in my book, he makes it not confusing.
Really?
Yeah. That's so interesting that
the version that I read, it was like he sent him this indecipherable thing that was like France on Tuesday or something.
Yeah,
and his dad was like,
because I'm gonna look
what am I
for
supposed to do with this? And so C.S. Lewis resented Albert for not showing up, but George Sayer in his book defends Albert and is like, yeah, nobody in their right mind could have made sense of that telegraph. Like, it's not his fault he didn't show up.
Yeah, I guess it's funny. It's super funny because in Alan Jacobs, the author of
The Narnian,
does the complete opposite.
History is fake, guys.
So, traveling quickly to Mrs. Moore's house in nearby Bristol, Patty had already gone to the front. He sent he being Lewis, sent an urgent message to his father. And this is what it says. Have arrived Bristol on 48 hours leave. Report Southampton Saturday. Can you come Bristol? If so, at station. Reply Mrs. Moore's address, 56 Ravenswood Road, Redlands, Bristol. Jack. That's what he wrote. And yeah, this is I mean, it's a telegram. It's not like an author's novel. but Alan Jacob goes in and talks about, like, this is that he knew he was at he was gonna be shipped off. He knew he was in this area and all this, so everything should have lined up, and Albert should have understood it perfectly fine. At the very least, enough to be in motion to get to his son, who gave him an address and said, "I've got 48 hours. Come here within 48 hours." Right? Like, there's enough information to start the motion, even if you're like, "Wait, what's happening? What's going on?"
You've
Your
got
hand is
48
raised.
hours
you have a
to-
question, Amy? Oh, okay.
She's just stretching. Yeah.
But yeah, so like, to me, I guess because I read the Narnian and I was influenced in this direction, Albert's a dick.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Do you
But
disagree still?
I don't. There were other examples too. Like, one of the ones was after he got like a month of leave toward the beginning of his military career.
Yeah.
He didn't go directly to Belfast. He spent a few weeks with Mrs.
Mrs.
Moore
Moore.
and Patty.
Yep.
And then went to Belfast.
Yeah.
And if I was someone's dad, that would hurt my feelings.
Sure, it would piss me off.
Yeah.
So,
I think they were both at fault.
I do too. I think that,
As in most relationships,
yeah,
both
nobody's
people
perfect.
are really bad.
But I think C.S. Lewis is at fault for one. I mean, being so freaking horny, right? Wanting some of that Miss Moore. He wanted more.
Oh, that was right there, and you
Yeah,
just took it.
I just took it. It's a low hanging fruit. And then, like, I think Albert. I mean, at this point, Albert's dealing with a lot of alcoholism, or that's what they think. He's drinking a lot, and he's dealing with the fact that he's alone in this house. He doesn't have his children. They're both going off to war. And so there was a lot of pain for him
Yeah.
there.
And that probably didn't make him act any better.
No.
Hurt people, so.
Yeah. And so I think that there was a great divide between them, and that's how C.S. Lewis went off to war.
Yeah.
He went to the trenches. Like I said before, he did a lot at the front.
Yeah.
And do you have anything specific before I get into what I'm going to get into?
Well, I was just going to mention that pretty early on he got trench fever
Yeah.
and ended up in the hospital. And at that point, his relationship, it seemed like, was a little bit strained with his brother, too.
Yeah.
But when Warren realized, like, that he was actually sick, I made a note of it. He rode a bicycle 50 miles to see his brother in the hospital.
Yeah.
And then rode 50 miles back.
Yeah.
Which I don't think my sister would do that for me.
So it's not actually when he was sick, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
Oh, yeah, that was with his second
Yeah,
hospitalization.
I'm gonna get into that.
Yeah,
in a
you
second.
talk about why he ended up in the hospital that time.
So Lewis saw action, and we're talking about World War I, where like there were days, weeks where you didn't do any fighting. You would just sit in the trench,
Which was miserable.
yeah, and you would get fever or
And trench foot.
bored and shoot each other's feet and
Gross.
all kinds of things. And then there were times where, I mean, the battles would be the most horrific battles that you can think of. I still think, from what I know, and I don't know a whole lot, but
He was there.
from I'm 100 years old, guys. But the World War I warfare was pretty darn crazy. I know World War II was crazy as well, but with the trench warfare, especially on the Western Front, it was never been done again, and that's the first of its
Because
kind.
it was so miserable.
It was miserable. You have machine guns who would just cut people in half if they just popped their head out to look over, and so he was in the middle of this, and he went into battle, and his entire group, squad, platoon, I don't know what it'd be called.
We're
his,
not in the military,
his
guys.
entire team.
Battalion. They scored a touchdown.
The sports ball team went into the field, and they all died, except for Lewis, who, while he lived, was very much injured. And so this is the time when Warney got a letter from his dad. Somehow a letter got sent around, and I believe it went like this. C.S. Lewis sent a letter to his father and said, "I have been injured." And he put it, "moderately injured." His dad sent a letter to Warney and said, Jack has been severely injured. And Warney drove all the way up to the hospital, 50 miles.
Rode his bicycle.
Oh, I thought it was a motorcycle.
I think it was a bicycle.
Oh, we're going to have to look this up.
I think he tried real hard to get there.
But we're going to leave that for the next episode. That's the big cliffhanger. Not that Jack
How did he
is
get there?
injured and might be severely injured to the point of death. I mean, is he going to live, guys? We don't know. At 20
It could
years
go
old.
either way.
I mean, he's not going to write Narnia for another 30 years, but he might die. The real cliffhanger is, did Warren drive a motorcycle or ride a bicycle 50 miles to see his brother in the hospital? We'll pick up there next time.
On Between Lewis and Lovecraft.
You got it. All right.
I didn't know if you were going to say it or not.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Before we get out of here, just wanted to let you know, in the next episode, we're going to be talking about a few different things. Like, number one, the big mystery. How did Warren get to C.S. Lewis?
Because now I'm really questioning.
We all have to figure that out. Hannah questions my chronological order of reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then all the others, or The Magician's Nephew. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the academic career that comes after all the military stuff. If C.S. Lewis survived.
Yeah.
Right,
We
obviously.
haven't confirmed that yet.
And then also if he survived his second super weird relationship with a woman, a.k.a. his marriage.
But first, to get that next episode, you'll have to find us. So you can check out our Facebook, which is Between Lewis and Lovecraft, and that's the ampersand for the and.
Yeah. It's a cool looking little thing.
You should check out Tyler's logo because it's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And then you can also email us if you have any comments or questions for future episodes. And that address is lewisandlovecraft, all spelled out, @gmail.com. And help support us. Subscribe, review us, tell a friend.
Yeah, so subscribe to our show wherever you can, wherever you get our podcast. You're already listening to the show, so you should
got it
have
somewhere.
something. Yeah. If not, ask your grandson to help you find it.
Me, I'll help you, Grandma.
Yeah, or email us, and we'll show you where to go to subscribe to our show, because then you can stay up to date. We're going to be releasing a lot of shows really quick all at once, and then, hopefully periodically after that.
You should also rate and review us on iTunes or on Facebook.
Yeah, if you're not into iTunes, if you want to leave a review, Facebook is the place to do it. But if you're really trying to help our show, guys, I cannot stress enough how important it is that you review our show and rate our show on iTunes. It is the way to get your show out there, is through iTunes.
If you love us.
If you love us.
You'll rate and review us on iTunes.
But the number one thing that they can do
is tell a friend.
Yeah.
Or,
hey, Hannah, I heard of this great new podcast
called, what's it called?
Between Lewis and Lovecraft. They talk about books and authors and people spanking each other.
I love books and authors and no comment on the other one, so I'm definitely going to subscribe.
I was waiting for you to say and people spanking each other.
I can't. My parents might listen to this.
Yeah, and you can't say that in front of them?
I can't say that.
Mom, Dad, I read about people spanking each other.
But it's C.S. Lewis,
the
great Christian icon, so it's
so
okay.
Guys, remember, subscribe wherever you can. Leave a review, rate us, and tell a friend. Spank him. Tell a friend.
Pay him a shilling first.
Yes, of course. Thank you guys so much for listening to our show. One real quick little thing. I just wanted to give a shout out to Jake Basson for the amazing music that he contributed to our show, and just say thank you so much, man. It sounds great, at least to me. If you guys like it, let us know so we can let Jake know.